Hey everyone, welcome back to Toasty TCG. So this format I've chosen to play Eldlich Dogmatika, which I've had a lot of success with, able to top every single tournament I've played in this format. So today I'm going to share my deck profile with you. But before I begin, make sure to like and comment on the video, let me know what you think at the end of the video. Also, make sure to subscribe, you guys have no idea how much I appreciate it. And at the end of the video, I also intend to show you guys some interactions in the engines, as well as some combos. If you intend to pick up the deck, make sure to watch all the way through to the end. So to get right into it, I'm going to be talking about the Eldlich portion of the deck. So to start off, there's 2 Golden Lords. The reason that you only want to play 2 and not 3 is because 3 is kind of bricky, whereas if you play 1, you risk getting it banished, and then you turn off your entire engine, so you want to play 2. Now, this card is just really powerful. It has 2 very good effects. It of course has the one that people know way more, the effect to bring itself back by sending a spell or trap from the field to the graveyard. But of course it also has a very powerful spot removal effect where you discard itself and a spell or trap to target a card and send it to the grave. So it's kind of like a Ding Gears 2 from your hand, which is very powerful. At worst, it forces some kind of response, and of course at best, it removes a card that you want to get rid of from the field. So this card is just very versatile, it's very powerful. It's of course why this engine is so successful at doing what it does. Next up is the first Eldland. This is the modern day pay 8 to feel great card. You get to search a golden land or a golden lord. I'm going to get into the golden lands in just a moment. And the only golden lord that we have at the moment, of course, is Eldlich the Golden Lord. Then of course it also has the effect of if it leaves the field, you get to send a golden land or golden lord to the graveyard. So typically, if you already have a golden land in the grave, you want to send your other copy of Golden Lord to the graveyard, just because there's no point in losing out on extra golden lands. They're going to want to be able to put on your field. But of course, if you don't have a golden land in the grave, it's best to send a golden land, just to kind of get your engine going. So that's how that card works, and of course it's a continuous spell as well. So people will typically, they might ash it, but that's not going to stop the card entirely, because then you're just able to use it again next turn. And it's also still on the field for your Golden Lord to send to the graveyard and summon himself back. So this card is just very powerful, just the fact that it's a continuous spell and has 2 effects attached to it. Next up is Elixir of Scarlet Sanguine. This is the only Elixir that you should be playing at 3. Black and white aren't that great, because at one point or another in the duel, they're going to be dead cards. And what I mean by that is, for example, the Black Awakening is summoned from the hand or the deck. So eventually you're not going to have Golden Lords in your deck, and they're going to be in the grave, meaning Black Awakening isn't really going to be doing anything. Of course you can send it from the field to the grave for your Golden Lord, but you also want to be able to have that effect of summoning it from the deck, which Scarlet Sanguine also does. Now the problem with White Destiny is White Destiny summons from the hand or grave, and at the beginning of the duel you're probably not going to have Golden Lord in your hand or grave, meaning the card, once again, it does nothing. But if I had to choose between the 2, I would say White Destiny is a little bit better just because it's a quick play. However, Scarlet Sanguine does the best way of getting Golden Lord out. It summons it from the grave or the deck, which are 2 places that will always be live at one point in the duel or the other. Of course, summoning from the deck very early, and then summoning from the grave in late game. This card is pretty much never dead unless somehow you got very unlucky and opened both your golden lords. And then of course it has the second effect that all 3 Elixirs have, where you can banish it from your graveyard to set a golden land from your deck. The reason that this is good is because it pretty much makes your entire engine interact within itself. So your engine's never going to end up being dead, because one card can always lead to another coming out of your deck. And these effects to set from deck can't be ashed, which is of course one of the most common hand traps in the game. So it just gets around a lot of different things, and make sure your engine is always live. Now for the Golden Land cards that we're playing is just the pretty standard stuff. Playing 3 Walkeros and 3 Conquistadors. I've seen a couple people play 2 Wakaros. That's something that you can do if you'd rather play more to the Dogmatica engine, but I'm playing a pretty even amount of both, so I'm playing 3 and 3. Conquistador, when activated, is a trap monster, as well as Wakaro. They're both trap monsters, and they do different things though, but you have to control your Golden Lord for them to do those different things. If you don't control the Golden Lord, they just summon as trap monsters. Conquistador is 500 attack, 1800 defense, whereas Wakaro is 1800 attack, 1500 defense. Now, if you have your Golden Lord though, Conquistador can pop a face-up card, and Wakaro has the ability of banishing a card from either player's graveyard. Being able to banish from either graveyard is very important, just in the event that for some reason they have something to target your graveyard with that you don't want to let resolve. You have the option of banishing your card before that they are able to resolve their effect, and the same works for their graveyard. They're activating an effect that targets a card in your grave, or they're activating a card that brings itself back from the grave, something like that. You can use Wakaro, get rid of it before they have a chance to use it, or just use it so they're forced to waste a card on that card that you're advanced with Wakaro. So these cards are very versatile, especially in the fact that Conquistador does not target. So once you activate him, if they don't have a way to remove this card, he's going to resolve and pop a face-up card that your opponent doesn't really know what it is yet. Sometimes, they have, of course they can guess what it might be. They make, an educated decision. But at the end of the day, if Golden Lord is on the field when this resolves, you're going to be able to pop a face-up card, which is just very powerful. So that's the entire Eldlich engine. It's about 15 cards if I'm not mistaken. And if you're just trying to keep a simple Eldlich engine, that's really all you need. You don't need the counter trap, because if you play the counter trap, that card doesn't set any more Eldlich or Elixir cards from your deck. So you have that one-time counter trap, but after that, the counter trap is kind of like a dead end in your engine, because, for example, you have Wakaro. When you use him, you get to banish something from your opponent's grave, and then during the next turn, if this guy's in your grave, you can banish him to set an Elixir from your deck. Now, if say this is Golden Land Forever, you flip it, you negate something, during your next turn, this doesn't do anything if it was Golden Land Forever. This just kind of sitting in your grave, now doing nothing. So that's why I've opted not to play Golden Land Forever, just because I feel like it is going to interrupt the consistency of the deck. It's very powerful negate, of course, but like I've already gone over, it's a dead end in your deck's engine, which you never want to have to see. Alright, next up, we're going to be talking about the Dogmatica engine. So, to start off, there is 3 Nadir Servant. This card is incredibly versatile. It's pretty much the 2020 Engage. So, this lets you send any monster from your extra deck to the grave to search a Dogmatica monster from your deck, put it in your hand. But that Dogmatica monster has to have equal or less attack than the sent monster, which isn't really a problem because the ones that you're sending have pretty high attack. So there's never going to be a situation where you're not going to have a card in your extra deck that's going to match the attack of the Dogmatica you want to search. The Nadir Servant can also add a Dogmatica from your grave to your hand instead of your deck to your hand. That doesn't come up too often, but sometimes there is a card that you want to search that you might have already gone through. So being able to add that card back to your hand from the grave can come up, just not too often. The card you typically want to search is Ecclesia the Virtuous. This card is pretty much another copy of Nadir Servant on legs. You can special summon it as well if there is an extra deck monster on the field, but when it gets summoned, either way, normal summon or special summon, you get to search any Dogmatica card that you want, get it to your hand. So you have a lot of options I'm going to go over in just a moment. And keep in mind that if this card battles an extra deck monster, it's not destroyed by that battle, so sometimes that comes up as well. You can use that defensively, and you can also use that aggressively by crashing this thing into 1500 attack extra deck monsters. Next up is the last 2 Dogmatica monsters. First we have Maximus. This is the one that I mentioned previously from Nadir Servant. If you ever need to add this card back from your grave to your hand, you have that option. And keep in mind, something I forgot to mention with Nadir Servant is just how versatile the card is. Because Nadir Servant just has so many cards that you can send from your extra deck to the graveyard to get different effects, which I'm going to go over in just a bit. I just wanted to mention that card's just extremely versatile. So, with the Maximus, you get to summon it by banishing any extra deck monster from your graveyard except for link monsters. And then once per turn, you can force both players to send 2 cards from their extra decks to the grave of their choice. Now, the problem with this card is, if you're playing a mirror match, or if you're playing against someone who has cards in their extra deck, with the intention of beating this card out. Such as Elder Entity Natis. If Elder Entity Natis goes to the grave, they get the option of destroying a card on the field. They have to target it, of course, but being able to just send that from the grave to your opponent's card effect, and then get to destroy something on their turn, especially if you haven't even had a turn yet. Say you're going second, and your opponent uses Maximus, you send your Elder Entity Natis and get to pop something on the very first turn of the game. It's pretty powerful. So there are really good counterplays to this card, but this card's very good against combo decks where there's really no room for those kind of counterplays. And just being able to rip 2 cards out is just really helpful. And you're able to, of course, send 2 cards from your extra deck to the grave that are going to help you as well. So this card is also just very powerful. In the event that your opponent is counterplaying it with the card that I mentioned before, like Elder Entity Natis, you can always just side it out. It's not the biggest deal in the world. And then finally, for the monsters, is Dogmatika, Fleur-de-Lis, the Knighted. This card is kind of iffy. So how it works is, if there's an extra deck monster on the field, during either player's main phase, you get to special summon it from your hand if you want to. And if there's also a Dogmatika monster on the field, you can negate the effects of a monster on the field. This is another card, like Garo, where if you don't want to be playing a second copy, you don't have to. So if you want to go more in on the Eldlich engine, or if there's just something else you want to play, you don't really need to play this card at 2. But this is kind of just a preference thing. Then also, if this card, or any Dogmatika monster for that matter, declares an attack, you can make all Dogmatika monsters permanently gain 500 attack with Fleur-de-Lis. So when this thing attacks for the first time, it's going to automatically be at 3000 attack, which is just really helpful. And the effect that it has in hand to summon itself and negate the effects of a monster, that all happens in the hand and doesn't even target. So this gets over things such as the Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, because this doesn't target Dragoon, it can just slap itself on the board and negate Dragoon's effects. That's a really helpful card in the game. It just helps you deal with a lot of different things. And then finally is Dogmatic Punishment. This is a super ignorant trap card. It lets you target a monster on the field, send a card from your extra deck with higher attack than that monster, and then destroy that monster. And then keep in mind, when you send that monster from your extra deck to the grave, that monster might have its own effects. The example that we've been going over so far, Elder Entity Natis, who has 2500 attack, so that can destroy a lot of things with punishment. Say you send Elder Entity Natis, then you can trigger Elder Entity Natis' effect and pop another card on the field. This card is just very versatile. You can pop your opponent's monster and then send something that's going to help your deck's consistency. You can pop your opponent's monster and then destroy another card on their field. You can pop your opponent's monster, send something to your grave. That's just going to help you in the long run and help outgrind your opponent later on. So this card is just very versatile and very powerful. If there's a single card in the Dogmatica engine that's a problem, it's definitely this. The card's extremely powerful, and that's why I choose to play it at 3. You of course can play the card at 2, but I feel like this card's just so versatile and powerful that you should be playing the card at 3. Next up, I'm going to be talking about the remainder of the main deck. This is going to consist of the hand traps and then the additional tech cards. So to start off, for hand traps is Triple Gamma and of course your one driver. This is still pretty much the most powerful hand trap in the game, just simply because it has the effect of not only negating the monster effect, but destroying it as well. So, saying it's the most powerful might be a bit of an exaggeration, but still extremely powerful. So the reason that it's so good is because if your opponent activates, say, a monster effect from their hand, which is very prevalent in this format, you're able to negate that monster's effect and then destroy it from their hand. And then, of course, if you play against a combo deck where they're making all these link monsters, you're able to say, stop the link 2 and then destroy it, leaving them with whatever they intended to get not being there, as well as losing that body, which of course is very important in combo decks. And this card is especially good in this deck because there's scenarios where you don't really dedicate your board to too many monsters. You can say set 5 and literally just pass on that, and then you can have that Gamma in your hand. So now you have all this back row with a Gamma on top of it, whereas other decks are very monster heavy, so Gamma might not be as good in those decks as it is in this deck, because right out of turn 1, they're already putting monsters on the field, making their Gamma useless, which is why I've noticed people have decided to start cutting Gammas out of their deck. But in this deck, I feel Gamma is still very powerful, and that's why I'm still playing it. Next up is Triple Ash Blossom. This card has found its way back into the meta. I recall last format, Ash Blossom not being so good just because it really didn't do anything against combo decks, briefly stopping them, but really not stopping them. The reason that Ash Blossom is just so good this format is because it stops things like Drytron and Virtual World. Once again, those are monster effects that activate in the hand. Once you stop that starter that they need, it's very hard for them to really put a board presence up. So you Ash, say a Drytron level 1 monster, or you Ash pretty much any Virtual World monster that activates in the hand, and suddenly you just shut down their whole deck for the turn. Ash is very powerful in this format, and regardless of what deck you're playing, you should definitely be playing this card at 3. Up next is 2 Forbidden Droplets. This card is really powerful in the Eldlich engine, as well as things in tandem with things like your Gamma driver, and you can chain it to things such as your Nadir Servant to send it to the grave. And then what makes this card so powerful is not only the ability to send cards from your field to the grave that you want to put in the grave, but also depending on what card you send, your opponent can't respond with that same type of card. So, for example, let's say you have a Conquistador on the field, and your opponent has more back row than they have monsters. If you go Forbidden Droplets, send Conquistador to the grave, you're now sending a trap to the grave, so now your opponent can't say activate Solemn Judgment and negate the Forbidden Droplets, preventing you from being able to negate whatever monster you're trying to stop. Then, of course, you want to send monsters against a combo deck so they can't chain their Moral Load Savage Dragon to negate this. This card is just very versatile, and not only is it versatile at negating monsters, it's also versatile at putting cards that you want in your grave to where you want to get them. This card is just very powerful, and also keep in mind it halves the attack of whatever monsters you're negating, so it just does a lot, and of course it's quick play too, so that means you can use it during the damage step because it modifies attack stats. So you have the ability to negate monsters, have this really powerful battle phase type effect if you really need to use that, and you can also use it to put the cards in the grave that you want to have in the grave. This card is extremely powerful, and if you feel indifferent on playing, say, your Gamma, you can even cut Gamma for maybe a Skullmeister and then replace Driver with your third copy of Forbidden Droplets. This card is just very versatile, very powerful. I just highly recommend that you give it a shot if you haven't already tried Forbidden Droplets in this type of deck. Next up is a single trap trick. The reason that this card is so good is because we're playing 6 normal traps that you want to see, and this is pretty much just a 4th copy of those normal traps. Playing triple Dogmatic Punishment, and then a normal trap that I haven't revealed yet, and in theory you can also use it to get a Eldlich or Sanguine out of your deck, but you really don't want to do that. You want to be able to go through all 3 copies of Scarlet Sanguine. You don't want to be losing even one, because you want to make sure you have your Eldlich engine completely ready to go. You don't want it to be cut short by Trap Trick, but just keep in mind that is an option. This card's very powerful in this deck. and it's just simply because of the way the deck is built. Now, speaking of that normal trap I haven't revealed yet, it is 3 Ice Dragon's Prison. This is another extremely ignorant, very versatile trap card. The reason that this card is so good is because you have the ability of taking a monster from your opponent's graveyard, and then you can banish a monster from both player sides of the field that have a matching type. So, for example, you don't even have to banish, which is really good. But for example, say you play against a dinosaur player. Say they normal summon Overactor. Then they activate its effect and chain Miscellaneousaur, or they search Miscellaneousaur, activate Miscellaneousaur. You can chain your Ice Dragon Prison, taking the Miscellaneousaur from their grave, and then banishing both that Oviraptor and the Miscellaneousaur before Miscellaneousaur's discard effect resolves. So when Miscellaneousaur resolves, dinosaurs won't be affected by card effects the rest of the phase, but you already got rid of the Oviraptor, and now you've banished that Miscellaneousaur from their grave, so you're not going to be able to use that second effect. Now, let's rewind that scenario a little bit. Let's say the first thing in their turn is activate Miscellaneousaur. You can activate your Ice Dragon Prison, just taking the Miscellaneousaur out of their grave, and now they don't have a dinosaur on the field for you to banish, but you just took the Miscellaneousaur out of their grave, so they can't use its effect in the grave to get their Animadorned Archosaur from their deck. This card is just very versatile at taking your opponent's resources away, and you can use it to establish your own. What I really like about this card is in the mirror match, you can use it to take your opponent's Golden Lord, turning your own engine on, while also disrupting their own. So this card does a lot of work no matter what you're up against, except for Drytron, because Drytron all have a very specific summon condition that pretty much prevents this card from being used. But that's the only scenario where Ice Dragon's Prison isn't super powerful. Any other matchup, Ice Dragon's Prison is just so versatile and so powerful that you definitely should be playing this trap card in this type of deck. And then finally is a Shaddoll Schism. So if you don't know how this card functions or why I'm playing it, I'm going to go over that in just a moment. But what this card lets you do is fusion summon any Shaddoll monster by banishing the material from your field or from your graveyard. And in just a moment, I'm going to go over why that's so important in this deck. Alright, moving on, we're going to be talking about the extra deck. So to start off, we've got Titaniclad, the Ashen Dragon. Now, this card you are never going to summon, but that's not a bad thing. The reason that we play this card is to put it in the graveyard straight from our extra deck using things like the Dear Servant, the Dogmatic Maximus, and Dogmatic Punishment. Because during the end phase of this card is sent to the grave, you can take a Dogmatic monster from your deck, and then you can either summon it, or you can add it to your hand. So if you're doing it on your end phase, you of course are going to want to add it to your hand. But if you do it on your opponent's end phase, you're more than likely going to summon your Dogmatica Plesia right from your deck, triggering your Plesia's effect to search a Dogmatica card for your turn. So then the end phase of course ends, your turn begins, you now have whatever Dogmatic card you wanted in your hand. This card is very versatile, but you really only need to resolve it that one single time every game. You don't really need to play a second copy of it. But this extra deck is very open, so if you feel like you want to play a second copy, you of course can play 2 copies. Up next is our Shaddoll package. That's going to be 1 El Shaddoll Apkalon, 2 El Shaddoll Windows, and 2 El Shaddoll Constructs. So if you're unfamiliar with this deck, let me explain how this engine works. So typically with your Dogmatica engine, when you activate Nadir Servant, you're going to want to send El Shaddoll Apkalon to your grave. This is going to let you search whatever Dogmatic card you want. Now, El Shaddoll Apkalon has the effect of, when it's sent to the grave from anywhere, you get to add a Shaddoll card from your deck to your hand, but then you have to discard a card. So typically, if you're doing this combo, you're going to want to discard your Shaddoll Schism. Then later on, if you have El Shaddoll Construct or Winda sent to the grave, you can add a Shaddoll card from your grave to your hand, so you can add back the El Shaddoll Schism. Now, this is going to put 2 Shaddolls in your grave. you're now then going to be able to fusion summon a Shaddoll using the Schism that you have during the next turn, assuming you set Schism. This means that you can summon Winda, and Winda of course says you can only special summon once per turn. That's an effect that applies to both players, and also Shaddoll Winda cannot be destroyed by card effects. So this is pretty much like a lock to prevent your opponent from comboing off. It's a very powerful card, and it's a very compact engine, because pretty much the entire engine is in your extra deck, whereas you only play one Shaddoll card in your main deck. I'm going to go into the combo in a little more detail in just a moment. Next up is 2 Elder Entity Natis. This is a card that I talked about previously. Once it's sent to the grave, you get to pop a card on the field after targeting it. So, for example, if you activate your Nadir Servant, instead of sending your Shaddoll package to the grave, you can send your Elder Entity Natis. You get to search your Dogmatika card, and then you can activate Natis' effect, targeting a card on the field to destroy it. So, this pretty much ties an additional effect to whatever sends it to the grave. So, for example, like I already went over the Nadir Servant, you also have Dogmatic Punishment, where you pop something with 2,500 or less attack by sending Natis, and then you get to trigger Natis' effect to target another card on the field, destroy it, as well as with Dogmatic Maximus. Send 2 cards from both players' extra decks to the grave, then you can activate Natis' effect to destroy a card on the field. This card is just live with so many card effects, it's very powerful just having that extra destruction. Next up is Psyframe Lord Omega. The reason that I'm playing this card is not only because it has the effect of targeting a card in either player's graveyard, shuffle that card and this card back into the owner's decks, but also you can actually synchro summon this card with your Gamma, because Gamma and Driver add up to level 8, so that's not like too bad. Sometimes it comes up. If you're able to resolve Gamma on your own turn, you can make this. Also, it has 2,800 attack, which comes up with Dogmatic Punishment. And like I mentioned already, it has the effect of messing around with the graveyard. So you can use this to put stuff from your extra deck that's in your grave back into your extra deck, or you can use it against your opponent to mess around with their graveyard, taking cards that they want in the grave and putting them back into the deck. It's a very versatile card, and that's why we played this card, just because this deck is very full of versatile cards. So you want to make sure you have all these versatile cards just put together to make this deck, of course, as versatile as possible. That's a very common word for this deck profile. Then is Wind Pegasus at Ignister. This card is kinda like Elder Entity Natis. So how this card works is you put it in the grave the same way that you put Natis in the grave. However, if your opponent destroys a card you control, either by battle or card effect, you can banish your Natis, or not your Natis, your Wind Pegasus, to target a card on the field and shuffle it back into the owner's deck. This is typically a card you can use to disrupt your opponent and get rid of cards that are on their field back into their deck. Very powerful, very versatile. Just being able to put a card back into the deck. Sometimes you don't want to get that card into the grave, or you don't want to be destroying that card. Being able to shuffle it back into the deck is just a really good spot. Next up is a pretty small Link package, starting off with Link Spider. This might be a little bit of a surprise to you guys, but I didn't mention this previously, but trap monsters are treated as normal monsters. So if you want to get, say, your Conquistador off the field, you can actually just link it away into a Link Spider. The reason that you'd want to do this is because the Golden Land cards, they all have effects in the grave where you can banish them to set your Eldlich from your deck. So, say you used Garo on your opponent's turn and now it's on your board, you can attack with it, do something like that, and then during main phase 2, you can link it away to Link Spider, putting the Garo in your grave to use during the end phase. That's a pretty helpful effect. Just being able to put those cards in the grave and still retain a monster on the field is pretty useful. And then is our small access code engine, one Selene, one access code talker. So what you do with this is any 3 monsters make Selene, and then for every spell on the field and in the grave, she gets a counter on her. You really just want to get 3 counters on her, because you can remove 3 counters to get a spellcaster from your grave or from your deck, not from your deck, from your hand or from your grave, and summon it to a zone that she points to. And keep in mind, every single Dogmatica monster is a spellcaster. So this engine's pretty live. The thing is, however, is this isn't a deck where you're trying to like outright just OTK your opponent or anything. So this is something that doesn't come up too often. If you want to change this out, this is something that you can more than welcome change out, because it will come up maybe once or twice a tournament. It's not too... You don't go into it too often, but when you do, of course you're making it to end the game, because Access Code Talker is going to pop out at 5,300 attack. You're going to be able to destroy 2 cards on the field, and typically that's where you're going to try to OTK your opponent. And another really cool thing about Solemn is you don't have to use her to go right into Access Code Talker. So, for example, you can make your Solemn, you can bring back Ecclesia, and then when Ecclesia is summoned, you can get Ecclesia's effect to search if you want to, but typically you're going to be using it to go into Access Code and OTK your opponent. So that's just a really neat little thing that you can do in this deck. But like I've already mentioned, this extra deck is very open to interpretation, so if there's something that you want to change, you can change it to something else. Next up is a little card that we play for Eldlich. This is Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max. This is 2 level 10 monsters, and it's really not too hard to get out your 2 level 10s, 2 Golden Lords. Just keep in mind, if you summon 1 off Sanguine, you are locked into zombies for the rest of the turn. So make sure that you use this card strategically, because you don't want to go Sanguine and try to make this on the same turn, because you will be locked out of it. But when you make it, you get to detach 1 material, burn your opponent for 2,000, and then you also have a 3,000 attack beat stick to swing with. So that's just a very, very big dumb monster that does a lot of damage. But what's really cool about this thing is after you attack with it, you still have the 1 material attached. You can go to main phase 2 and overlay your Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Skyhunger. This is a very powerful card. What can I say about this thing? It's quick effect. Detach 2 material, send every card on the field except itself to the graveyard. So this is just a very powerful threat on the board. If your opponent tries to threaten it, of course you can just board wipe. And keep in mind you just did 2,000 damage as well as swinging with this big 3,000 attack beat stick. So typically you're in a pretty good position, and then once you board wipe, you just put your opponent at such a huge disadvantage. But this is, again, another thing that doesn't come up too often. You're going to maybe summon it maybe like once or twice a tournament. So it's another one of those like spicy, like open to interpretation things. If you want to change this card, that's perfectly fine. It's something that like it's not mandatory to play. It's something that you can just play if you enjoy doing stuff like that. Just kind of taking your opponent by surprise is the point of the Solemn and the Zeus engines. They're just really neat things though, just very explosive blowout cards. So if you enjoy those type of ideas, definitely go with that. Otherwise, of course you can go with like things like Pleiades, the rank 5 XE that has the quick effect of bouncing things. So that's not a bad card to go with if you want. You can go with more targets for your Dogmatica engine, things like that. This is all just preference. So if you don't like those ideas, you don't, of course, have to use them. But so far I've had a lot of success with these options, so I would still recommend giving them a shot. Finally, let's talk about the side deck. So to start off is 2 copies of Ghost Spell and Haunted Mansion. You mostly want to play this card for your Virtual World and Dryton matchups, but this card's actually really good in general just because it's kind of like an Ash Blossom for the graveyard. If your opponent attempts to use effects that include the effects of interacting with the grave, you can negate it with Ghost Spell. So what's really cool about this card is it actually doesn't have to interact with the grave. So, for example, you got the new Drytron monsters. And the Drytron monsters all have the effect of tributing a monster on your field or hand. to summon themselves from the hand or the graveyard. If you have Ghost Spell, you can negate that effect even if it's in the hand, because it doesn't have to be coming out of the graveyard, it just has to have that effect of including the effect of summoning from the grave. So even if it activates in the hand, you can activate Ghost Spell, because Drytron monsters include the effect to summon from the graveyard. It's all one effect, to summon from hand or the graveyard. So if they activate it from either grave or hand, you can activate Ghost Spell, negating that Drytron monster's effect to summon itself. Next up is Pankratops. Just super big, dumb, ignorant monster. If you're going second, you get to special summon this thing most of the time, and you can battle over something, and then you can quick effect tribute it to pop something else. It's just a very, once again, versatile card. We've been using that word a lot here. Just a very good card. You should be playing this card in pretty much every single side deck if you're not already main decking this card. In some decks like Dinosaurs or Second Strategies, things like that, this should be in every single side deck that you can imagine. Very, very good card. Next up is just some back row hate. Two Lightning Storms, one Feather Duster. We already know what these cards are made for. They're getting rid of your opponent's back row and just being complete ignorant blowouts to whatever strategy your opponent's playing that's back row heavy. Then we've got triple Nibiru, the Primal Being. This is, of course, just anti-combo card. You can use this against Drytron, you can use this against Virtual World, Dragon Link, Noble Knights. The list just goes on and on and on about what cards, or what decks you can use Nibiru against. Just super explosive, ignorant card against anything that you're able to use it against. Next up is triple Solemn Judgment, 2 ultra rares and a common. Couldn't find that third ultra rare, unfortunately. The reason that we're playing this card is because we are not the only ones playing these cards. So this is a very back row focused deck, as you might have already noticed. You got things like Dogmatic Punishment, you have Trap Trick, you have Ice Dragon's Prison, you have the Golden Land monsters, the list goes on and on. If your opponent decides to side in those back row board wipes, you definitely want to have Solemn Judgment ready to negate, just so that way you have your whole back row still safe. Then keep in mind, if your opponent doesn't see those back row cards, you now have a Solemn Judgment just ready to go against whatever you need to use it against. Pretty much the strongest negate card in the game. Just counter trap, negate any monster summon, any spell trap activation. Very, very strong card, very ignorant. And that's what this deck is about, just using very ignorant trap cards to not let your opponent play or manipulate what you want to allow them to play. Just manipulate the resources and whittle them down to the point where you're able to kill them. And then next up is Paleozoic Divisions. This card is also really good. You're able to target a card on the field for the activation requirement, and then, not as cost, discard a card to banish that face-up card on the field. It doesn't even have to be a face-up monster. Just be any face-up card on the field. You're able to target, then if the effect resolves, you're able to discard and banish that card. So that's very powerful, very versatile. Once again, word of the day, versatile. Very good card. It also, of course, has the effect that when you activate a trap card, you can bring this back as a 1200 attack monster that's unaffected by your opponent's card effects. That's not the big focus. The big focus is that face-up banish removal, which is just very, very good removal. And you can also get it out with your trap trick. That's why we run 2 copies. You can even run 3 copies if you want. So that way you can side in 3 copies, have Trap Trick get 1 out. Trap Trick's just an extra copy of every normal trap in your deck, which is why normal traps are just very good in this deck. Finally, Imperial Order. This is pretty much a 4th copy of your Solemn Judgment. So once again, you're playing this to stop this stuff, and you're also playing it against pretty much anything. You go first, you want to side this in, and you really want to side out your Gamma driver package if you're going to go first. The reason that you want to side out your Gamma driver, just in case, is if you see more of your Dogma engine, so you're putting monsters on the field, and now your Gamma driver package would be kind of dead there. So you want to side out your Gamma driver for ignorant trap cards, which is your Imperial Order and your Solemn Judgments. These go in every time. Every time that you go first, you're probably going to want to side these 4 cards in and side your Gamma and driver out. Just very ignorant trap cards that just stop pretty much everything in the game. Anything that you want to stop, you're going to have those 4 trap cards for. Alright, up next is the interactions I want to talk about. So, to start off is something very simple. You have Cursed Eldland. Now, let's say you've got Golden Lord in your hand and you have no way to get him on the board. You can use your Cursed Eldland to search your Conquistador, for example. Now, from here, you can activate Conquistador and Golden Lord to send any card on the field to the graveyard. And now you can use Golden Lord, send Cursed Eldland to the grave to get himself back. Very simple. Now, let's say, for example, you're going first. You can use these 2 cards, sending Cursed Eldland to the grave. Then, of course, you get Cursed Eldland's effect, putting a second Golden Lord in the grave. Or, if you really want to, you hypothetically can send that Wakero or your Conquistador to the grave. I really wouldn't recommend it. And now you're at the end phase. You can manage your Conquistador to set your Eldlixir of Scarlet Sanguine, which of course get Golden Lord back out on the next turn. Speaking of your Golden Land monsters, let's talk about Wakero and Conquistador and a really cool way that they can interact with your Golden Lord. So, in the event that you have Golden Lord in the grave, of course you can send these to the grave that are set, but you can also send them from the monster zone to the grave because they're still treated as trap cards. But something really cool with Wakero and Conquistador is using them together. And what I mean by that is if you send a monster to the grave and then you also banish it in the same chain link, if that monster has an effect that activates when sent to the grave, it won't activate because at the end of the chain, that card was not in the grave. What I mean by this is, let's say for example you're playing against Burning Woods, and they put let's say they put Graph on the field. If you go activate Wakero, chain Conquistador, you resolve your Conquistador, summoning it in defense because it has 1800 defense, and then you pop their Graph. Then you resolve your chain link 1, Wakero, banishing the Graph from the graveyard, ending the chain link. Now, Graph went to the grave, but at the end of that chain link, Graph wasn't in the grave. So therefore, it's not going to get that effect of being sent to the graveyard, because it's not in the grave any longer at the end of that chain, which is just a really cool interaction on how to stop your opponent from getting those graveyard effects. Very cool thing just to keep in mind. Up next, let's talk about some really cool Dogmatica interactions. I'm going to go into this really in-depth combo for how to use your Shaddoll engine. So let's start off with the Deer Servant. You activate your Deer Servant, and now you send El Shaddoll Abkalon to the graveyard. From there, you're going to add Dogmatic Ecclesia, the Virtuous, and in a new chain, you're going to activate El Shaddoll Abkalon, adding Shaddoll Schism. Now what you want to do here, in most cases, is discard your discard your Shaddoll Schism to the grave. Next up, you would normal summon the Ecclesia, activating her effect. This would add Dogmatic Maximus to your hand. Now you're going to take the El Shaddoll Abkalon that's in your grave and banish it to summon your Maximus, preferably in defense position because it has 3000 defense, which is pretty difficult to get over. Now you're going to activate Maximus' effect. This is going to send 2 cards from both players' extra decks, as I mentioned previously. The ones that you probably want to send are Titaniclad and Construct. Your opponent sends their 2 cards, and now in a new chain, you activate your El Shaddoll Construct. When it's sent to the grave, you take a Shaddoll card from your grave, put it in your hand. This is going to get back your Shaddoll Schism. Now, cut to the end phase, you have your Schism set. During the end phase, you get the effect of your Titaniclad, letting you take a Dogma card, put it in your hand, or special summon it. You're going to add Fleur-de-Lis to your hand. Now, during your opponent's turn, you're going to want to activate your Shaddoll Schism during the main phase. And what's really cool about this card is, I forgot to mention, if you fusion summon a monster and it has an attribute that matches the attribute of a monster your opponent controls, you're able to send that monster to the grave. So, what we're going to do here is, we sent Titaniclad and Construct to the grave last turn. They're still in the grave. You're going to banish your 1 Shaddoll monster and your 1 Dark monster, and you will summon your El Shaddoll window. This is going to lock both players into 1 special summon per turn. Now, typically how you want to use this is in response to your opponent activating the effect that would special summon. So, let's go with something that people are familiar with, like Quick Launch, for example. So your opponent activates Quick Launch with the intention of summoning a rocket from their deck. You can chain your Shaddoll Schism, fusion summoning your El Shaddoll window. Now, El Shaddoll window is on the field as Quick Launch resolves, so they summon their rocket monster, and that is their 1 special summon for the turn as long as El Shaddoll window is on the field. So it's very powerful. It's pretty much locking your opponent out of any further plays. And then if they have a Dark monster on the field, of course, your Shaddoll Schism can send that Dark monster to the graveyard. That's a very powerful thing, but it gets really, much better, because you still have Fleur-de-Lis in your hand, and now there's an extra deck monster on the field and a Dogmatic monster on the field. So, say for example, they have a monster effect that might remove your El Shaddoll window, or maybe it's a very powerful extender that you want to stop. You can go activate Fleur-de-Lis. This is all 1 effect in the hand, by the way. So there's an extra deck monster on the field, so you're able to special summon it. However, there's also a Dogmatic monster on the field, so you'll get to non-targeting, negate the effects of a monster on the field. So, once again, all happens from hand. It doesn't target the monster you're negating or anything like that. It doesn't target after it's summoned. This is all 1 effect in the hand, which is why it's so powerful. So you summon your Fleur-de-Lis, that's your 1 special summon, and then you negate that monster's effect, which is just super helpful, and it can just really deter your opponent completely from making any plays now, because they're locked out of a special summon, you negate their monster effects, and you also just have 4 monsters just sitting on the board, and you pretty much put them at so far behind in the game state, it's very hard for them to break through this kind of. Another really cool interaction that you should know is involving your Shaddoll Schism. Now, we're going to go over the combo that I just mentioned again, but let's say you have one of these cards in your hand. So you resolve your Nadir Servant, getting your Ecclesia, and then you do your Aplon effect, getting Schism to your hand. Now, instead of discarding the Schism, you can discard, say, you want to discard like your Conquistador, and you keep the Schism in your hand. Now, you're going to be able to do all your other things, you're still going to set up your board, and you're still going to send Construct, even though it's not adding back Schism, just because you want to have that Shaddoll monster and that Dark monster in your grave. Just because you have Schism in your hand and you're not adding it back, don't get confused and accidentally send like a Wind Pegasus to the grave, because then you're going to completely shut off your Shaddoll engine, and you don't want to do that. You're going to just completely ruin your play to get to your window and things like that. Now, from here, you're going to have the Conquistador in your grave that you discarded because of El Shaddoll Avalon. So you can banish that, and then you get a Scarlet Sanguine from your deck, turning on your Eldlich engine, as well as having your Dogmatica engine already in play. That's just a really cool interaction. If you open the Nadir Servant, or just anyway get Schism to the grave, as well as pretty much any part of the Eldlich engine, you can set both engines up right away, which is just very powerful. Both engines are very versatile and powerful on their own, but if you're able to get both engines working right from turn 1, you're in a very strong position right away. So guys, that's going to wrap up today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot about this deck. If you have any questions or just anything about this deck that you're not sure about, be sure to comment that below. If this video helped you, of course leave a like, and please subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot, I really appreciate it. And also while you're down in the comments, check out the description, because in the description you can find all the Toasty TCG media. That's things like our Facebook page, as well as the TCG Player affiliate link. So next time that you go on TCG Player to shop for cards you already can buy, by using my link, you help my channel directly, which is just very helpful for me. I appreciate that a lot as well. And you can also go find our Discord in the description below, the TCG Network. Just help me grow that Discord channel a bit. That'd be like super helpful as well. And that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video once again. This is Toasty TCG signing out.